There are some enemies in the game which appear naturally or otherwise without any admin commands, but you cannot get their logbook. Now, there are enemies that do not appear naturally, but you can still get their logbooks. For example, the imposter, you can get their logbook. It is just that you need an admin or a developer to spawn it in. Even the siege engine, the frost spawner as it's called internally, you can get its logbook if you get a admin to do a kill all command. Even something like this, you can actually get its logbook. But there are certain enemies where you can't get their logbooks. And even for something like Please Donate, you can appear to get their logbooks if they were spawned in by an admin. For example, here, a noob, you can get the noob enemy which appeared in the Please Donate, and it shows it as appears in Please Donate instead of exclusive enemy as it does for Frost Invasion for some reason, or sorry, the Operation Ice event. But yeah, that's interesting. But I'm not even talking about these enemies. These enemies, yeah, you can get it, but I'm talking about enemies that most people will consider themselves enemies, but you can't even get them through admin commands. And we'll throw in some enemies that appear but you can't get through natural means, but you could probably get it through admin commands just for the fun of it. Now, the first enemy I want to talk about is the dummy boss, because actually the dummy boss does have an index icon. So if you go here, you can see, yes, it does have an index icon. However, you can't actually get the index for the dummy boss in regular gameplay because you can't get logbooks from tutorial mode. You can't get any drops from tutorial mode. That includes event drops. So you can't get any of the bells, for example. That being said, it doesn't even appear inside the index. It doesn't appear with the D. So for example, these are the Bs, the bullock, the circuits, and then you get all of a sudden you go into fallens and then the errors. It doesn't appear here, but there is a logbook entry for the dummy boss. In fact, it's not even an enemy that you can spawn in without any admin commands. We know it exists in the game because it spawns in tutorial mode, but you can see it doesn't appear in the modern version, nor does it appear in the legacy version. Yeah, it goes Crying Angel, Deep Freeze, Elite and Abnormal. It should be somewhere here, but it's not here. And if you go down to Legacy, Breaker, Breaker 2, Crying Angel, Cursed Skeleton, Deep Freeze, Enraged. It's not here either. I mean, yeah, if you spawn in an enemy from the Legacy version and it doesn't have any stats, it just spawns in and just stays there. However, unlike other enemies that I'll list in this video, you can actually get the logbook entry for this. What you need to do is you need to get an admin to spawn it into a regular game mode. So that's easy, that's casual, that's any other game mode. And then you need to defeat the dummy boss that way, because spawned enemies through admin panels can actually spawn in the logbook for that enemy. You can also get the admin to do a kill all command, and then it will kill the enemy, and then it could drop its logbook. But through regular means, you can't get the dummy boss, nor can you actually spawn in the dummy boss through admin mode, even if you have the admin mode game pass. I wonder if anyone has the dummy boss logbook, because another enemy that you can't get is the siege engine, but that's because you can't kill the siege engine unless you do a kill all command with the admin panel. Yes, this counts in this purpose as an enemy that appears, but you can't actually get its logbook for. But those are examples where admins can actually get it. I'm going to now give you examples where admins can't even get the logbook entry. And perhaps the most famous of them all is the Awakened Fallen King. Now, it may surprise you, but you can't get the Awakened Fallen King's logbook because it just doesn't exist. The reason for this is the Awakened Fallen King is actually not its own separate enemy, but it is actually a second phase for the Fallen King, and apparently it's actually a third phase if you goes into Complete Awakening. Yeah, it's actually a third phase for the Fallen King. So in the game's code, this is actually just referred to as the Fallen King. Now in the game's code, a lot of enemies aren't actually being referred to by their name that's shown on the screen. For example, the Siege Engine, obviously, that is the most obvious example. That's actually referred to as the Frost Spawner. But the Awakened Fallen King is technically not its own separate enemy. It is just the Fallen King second mode or second phase. This is very similar to the Reanimated and how it's related to the Abomination. You just need to think of this as the Reanimated and the original Fallen King, the OG Fallen King, the Abomination. Because in this case, I mean, technically, the Reanimated is very similar to the Abomination, and most people wouldn't consider this its own separate enemy, but would consider the Awakened Fallen King its own separate enemy. But technically, if that's the case, then the Reanimated is its own separate enemy, because it's not called the Abomination's Reanimated, it's just called the Reanimated. So what happens here is the Abomination looks like this, but then it just loses its head and looks like that. And apart from that, it's pretty similar, but technically, it's not its own separate enemy. The Reanimated is not its own separate enemy to the Abomination, so the Reanimated also does not have its own logbook entry, which is in fact wrong, because the Reanimated does have its own logbook entry. The only problem is it's a logbook entry for the Trick or Threat Town enemy. I mean, yeah, good luck trying to get a developer to spawn in the Reanimated so that you can get this logbook, but yeah, you can't actually get the reanimated, what we're speaking of in Polluted Wastelands 2's logbook. Another logbook that you can't get is the Molten Corpse. Now, it's not actually its own separate enemy. Well, it kind of is, but it kind of not. It's the same reanimated Awakened Fallen King thing. The Molten Corpse doesn't have its own consistent appearance, and it uses the model where it spawns in from, so the enemy that it spawns in from. So, for example, here, I think this is just the normal, that's just Molten, or is this the Molten? No, it looks like the Molten that's been Molten Corpsed. It's just a black rock / darkest red brown coloration. Again, in this case, the Molten Corpse is not its own enemy, even though it does inherit the stats of the original enemy, 75% of the enemy that it spawns from, 100% defense, stun immune, burn immune, but it is not its own separate enemy. So technically, the Molten Corpse, while it does appear and it says Molten Corpse, it is not an enemy that you can get the logbook from, so here's another enemy. I mean, technically, you then have enemies with, like, second phases, so you got the balloon without the balloon. You can't actually spawn in the balloon without the balloon, if that makes sense. But you can always spawn it in with the balloon. I wouldn't count that as its own separate enemy. Some people may, but you can't do that. So, like, the Fallen Rusher without its shield, you won't be able to get its logbook entry. It always comes with a shield. You never get it like this. And this doesn't even count for something like the slime, because the slime is actually its own separate enemy. It just transforms into other enemies, and enemies can transfer into the slime. So yeah, it's not the case that the Molten Corpse had to be coded like that so it doesn't drop its own logbook. No, because the slime also does drop its logbook. I mean, yeah, it can also appear naturally on wave 10, but it can also be killed in Polluted Wastelands to get, you know, the legacy and the modern versions of the slime. Oh, another enemy technically that you can't get is the Wax the Fox endoskeleton. I mean, you can get the endoskeleton form, and then you can use, like, the Lost Souls modifier, but you can't spawn in the endoskeleton form without the modifier. I mean, like, technically, it's the same enemy, but it has a completely different appearance. It's like spawning in the true form for the Frost Spirit. You can't do that either. Meanwhile, as for something like the Dark Necromancer or the Summoner Boss, yeah, you can still get them, but they only appear in 2 challenges, Legion Challenge and the Juggernaut Challenge. I mean, like, yeah, technically they're harder to get than the Health Cultist, but given that you can do the Legion and Juggernaut challenges over and over again without any difficulty, and they appear multiple times in these game modes, it's not that difficult to get them compared to the Health Cultist, which only appears once with a really, really, really low chance. And in terms of enemies, I think that's it. All other enemies are just fair game that you can get them. Cursed Skeleton, Skeleton, Mystery, Breaker, Breaker 2, Breaker 3, Breaker 4. Yeah, you can get them all. And that's it. I mean, all other enemies, you like the Imposter, like all of the Headquarters enemies. So that's the Streamer, Toilet, Chad, Toilet Boss, Hidden Wave Legacy enemies, Polluted Wastelands, Golden Mode. Not these, I don't think these are in the game. And then the replaced enemies, I don't think they're in the game either, apart from the Strong, Necromancer, Shock, and Mystery Summoner. All of these enemies, you can actually spawn them in through admin commands, and then you'll be able to get the enemies. But I mean, good luck with that. Good luck trying to convince the developer to spawn these in just for your benefit.